All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of my unending quest to help you better understand AWD 1000, web development technologies, and AWD 1111, database-driven websites, I've been creating a series of video presentations that I'm doing based off of some ebooks created by Mr. Flavio Copes. And so far I've done his HTML book, and now I'm in the CSS one. I'm about halfway through with that one. So as we continue on, we're talking about the display property. As it says, it determines how an object is rendered by a browser. Now, why is this important? I want to show you. All right, so let's go back to what we have here, and I'll tell you what, I'm just going to, the box sizing, the paragraphs, I'm just going to remove all that stuff. All right, so now I have nothing in here. All right, and in here, in here, I'm going to go back and I'm going to comment out these divs. And I'm going to go all the way down until I get to my unordered list, which is, I don't know where it is. There's the table. No, it's in here someplace. We'll find it. There it is. So very simply, I'm just going to keep this unordered list that's in here. In fact, let's go all the way to right here. All right, and we will. All right, so I'm going to comment out all of these paragraphs that I've got inside of this div, like that. So right now, the only thing that should be in here when I bring it up is this: first item, second item, third item. Okay, so let's play with this a little bit here. First of all, let's get rid of these classes, the colorful big and all that stuff. I don't need any of that. I don't need the strong. So I can get rid of that. And I've got first item, and now I've got second item. And now I will have third item. And let's make this an unordered list. Now let's change this and pretend at least that we're going to make a very simple little navigation. And this will say home. This will say about. And this will say contact. And I don't need the word item after any of these. All right, so right now it doesn't look like much, but you see it right here, home, about, and contact. Good. That's exactly what I want it to look like and say. So let's style it a little bit. All right, so let's come in and say for our unordered list and our list items in there, we want to set the, oh boy, what am I looking for here? Oh, I'm sorry, it's the weekend. No excuse. That's what I want. List style type, none. In fact, let's grab all that. All right. So what did this do? It's easier to show it to you. Okay. So I have now removed the dots at the beginning. Okay. Is that a big thing? No. But let's do one right now that's going to be a real big thing. And that is, I'm going to say display block. These display as inline elements by default, but now I have told them, it didn't work, but I have told them to display as a block. And I think the reason that that's wrong, so we'll fix it. Believe that the reason that that's wrong is that should go on the UL. Nope. All right, well, that did remove all that, so that's good. So my unordered list, margin planning, display block. I'm going to do it like this. All right, so my unordered list, my list items, I don't want there to be underlined. All right, my unordered list itself, I want there to be on it no margin and no padding. Okay, and for my ULLIA or my anchor elements, I want them to display block as opposed to displaying inline. So now what does it look like? Doesn't look any different. Well, let's double check. So got a UL. I do have my style sheet in here. And of course, now the phone rings. Hold on just 1 second. All right, sorry about that. I did it backwards. It already is displaying block. I want this to display inline. I think that's what the problem is. So let's say display inline. All right. Now I've got my LIs in here, my LIA, but I don't have any A's in here. So let me change this. Okay, and this is going to say A href equal index.html. Oh, this will say A href equals about. Now there is no about page, so it won't really go anywhere, but that's okay. And finally, we'll have, again, so now let's see what it looks like. All right, it's getting there. Believe it or not, it's getting there. All right, so we've got those. All right, list style type none. And display, we'll try here, inline block. And if it's wrong, it's because I'm putting it on the wrong thing. The code that's in there now is right. All right, so it's not moving it over. So let's look. So W3 schools, horizontal menu, navigation bar. We want one of these, right? All right. So that's going to give us this, which is what we don't want. We've already got that. Okay. We don't want a vertical navigation bar. They've got some examples of that. We want a horizontal navigation bar. That's what we want. All right, so the LI is what we want to display inline. And there you go. Now, they're still underlined where we don't want them to be. So we will take this list style type none. We will try to put that actually under the ULLIA. thought that would have removed them. But the point is, for now at least, we've got the inline block. Now, we can come in here and we could say margin, I don't know, 30 pixels, or let's say 2 rem. And watch how much more spaced out they're going to look now. All right? We can push them off to the right. There's a lot of different things that we can do here now. The point is this. What we did was we took a block element, all right, which was each one of these LIs, and we made them into an inline element by adding that. All right, that's the key component. Okay? And they'll talk about a lot more of them in here. So inline is the default display for every element. Inline block is similar to inline, but the width and height are applied as specified. Why is that important? It's important because by adding the block to inline dash block, or by adding that dash block, you can now set a width and you can set a height. You cannot set a width and a height with something that's inline by default. All right? All right, normally elements are displayed inline with the exception of some, including these, like the UL, like we just looked at, which are set to block by the browser. All right? Using display none can be used to make an element disappear. It's still there. All right? It's just as it says, it's not visible in the browser. All right. As far as positioning goes, it says you've got 5 values. Now, what we've been using for most of this stuff have just been the defaults, such as static, which is the default type of positioning. All right. Statically positioned elements that are displayed in the normal flow, which means they go from left to right as long as there's room, and if there's not room, it goes down a row. All right, etc. Relative, on the other hand, says you're now able to position it with an offset. So for instance, if I want it to be displayed and really 0, 0 in the upper left-hand corner here, that's 0, 0 on your screen. So if I wanted something positioned at 100, 100, it would be 100, 100 type of an idea. So here's an example that he says he made here on CodePen. Why don't we take a look at it? There it is. There's a parent container and a child container inside of it, and then an inner container or a box with some text in it. And there's the result. You can play with the positioning and do a lot of this stuff. So notice what they've done is they've moved it around here and here. So notice top minus 60, which moved it up 60 pixels. Here we've got left 180. So not only, it looks a little weird because when you say left, it moves it to the right, but it's also up again 180 pixels. You can position something absolutely, and as it says, it'll remove it from the document flow. All right? So when you do that, this is basically going to stay here regardless of how you move the element on the screen. It'll stay right there. Now, that's not a great example, but this maybe is a better one, maybe it's not. And there's fixed. It says like absolute, When it's fixed, it's removed from the flow of the page. The difference is, as mentioned there, with absolute positioning is this. Elements are now always displayed relative to the window rather than the first non-static container. All right. Now, I don't expect much of that to make sense, but again, in class, we will go over several examples. All right. Finally, there's sticky positioning. And sticky positioning can be used, for example, if you position something 0 pixels from the top and you tell it to be there sticky, a lot of times people will do stuff like that with a header so it doesn't move. Or 0 on the bottom with sticky positioning so their footer doesn't move. All right. Now it's interesting, it says floating has been a very important topic in the past. We're going to talk floating because it's still out there, it's still being used, but it's not being used a lot for new development. But there's a lot of legacy, meaning existing development out there that uses floating. There's 3 types of floating. You can float things to the left, you can float things to the right, and you can have no float whatsoever. And as you can see on the bottom there, having no float whatsoever is the default. All right. So they give an example here where they've got an image. Now, you should all know this. Now, what do we have in here? Let's just take a look at the text. So we've got a paragraph. All right, we've got this box and we've got this paragraph. Inside of this paragraph, there's the paragraph, but we've got an image. All right. And it says this image is in the middle of the text. And it is because by default, an image is an inline element. So there it is. And it looks kind of weird. Maybe you'd rather have the image over here and have the text flow around it, or the image over here and have the text flow around it. Well, if you say image float left, notice how it changes. Now, I'm not saying that's ideal or that's exactly where you want it. All right. But it probably looks a lot nicer, and that's floating it to the left. You can also float it to the right and make it look like this. The key takeaway from this, though, is after you float something, after you float it, everything that you put after that continues to float until you turn the floating off. All right? And when you turn the floating off, you basically, typically what most people do is they set a class called clear, where you set the float to none. And that's the clearing that they mention right here. So I should say, I guess it's both, to clear left and right floats. All right. For z-index, if you want to push something to the front, you give it a higher z-index. If you want to push something to the back, you give it a smaller z-index. So what does that mean? That means if you want something to be in the foreground, you give it a higher z-index, which I believe is 0 by default. So if I gave it a z-index of 1, regardless of where it was, okay, it would basically be placed in front. The other way to get around that would, if I want something to stick out, I could take whatever it's on, so whatever its background is or whatever, and I could give that a negative z-index. The default value for z-index is auto. As it says, it's determined by the position of the HTML elements on the page. You can use any number you want, as it says. They use 10 and 20, but you can use any numbers, including negatives, as I mentioned. It's common to pick non-consecutive numbers, so if you've got to do extra positioning in the end, you can do that. All right, great place to stop, because believe it or not, what we've talked about so far in the first 103 of 173 pages has been the easy stuff. Now it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So we're going to go and do grid next. I want to just see how many pages they're going to give to grid. If you told me about 20 or so, I'd believe you. All right, so, and again, about 17 or 18. Then we've got Flexbox, which again is probably going to have at least that many. So we're on 118. And then we'll get into tables. All right. So the next almost 30 pages, 26 or 27 pages, something like that, we will be talking about CSS Grid, and then we'll be talking about Flexbox. All right. They will all have at least their own video and probably 2 to 3 videos each. All right. And I'll be back with that shortly.